This is the Sony FX2. As someone who's currently using the FX6, FX3, and A7 IV extensively, I'll be honest, this camera had me a little confused at first. Why this camera and why now? A lot of people have been waiting for an FX3 Mark II, so hearing FX2 might feel a little bit unexpected, maybe even disappointing to some. But the real question is, what box does this check for Sony shooters, especially if you're already in the FX or Cine lineup? In this video, I'm breaking down the new features of the FX2, sharing my honest thoughts on the image quality, and pointing out a few areas where I think Sony could have gone further. Sony also invited me out on a little trip to check out a little bit more about this camera, which you'll see later in this video. Timestamps are below if you want to skip around, but let's get into it. One of the most notable features on this FX2 body is the addition, as you can see, of the built-in EVF. It's integrated directly into the camera, and the angle of this eye cup is adjustable by 0 to 90 degrees. You can go straight up or to the side, which adds a nice touch and making sure that it's flexible. But I'm still honestly getting used to it, to be honest. Now, right off the bat, I had some questions about this design, and I'll get into a few of the potential downsides later, but let's talk about the good things. Initially, I found myself wondering, why would Sony put a viewfinder on a body that's so similar to the FX3? But after using it in the field, I started to understand. The ergonomics are surprisingly user-friendly, and in bright environments or challenging shooting conditions, this EVF really comes in handy, just like on photo-first camera bodies. Also, for video, it's worth noting that EVFs are actually very common on higher-end cinema cameras, or at least the ability to add one on. A lot of camera operators and cinematographers prefer them for a better viewing experience, more accurate focusing, and even a bit of extra stability, because when you're pressing the viewfinder to your eye, it creates a third point of contact for more stable footage. So while it might seem odd at first, the decision to add an EVF actually makes a lot of sense when you think about how professional video shooters tend to work. Next, let's talk about one of the bigger features, which is the movie and still toggle switch that is now on the back of this camera. Once again, once I started using this toggle switch, it started to feel a lot more natural and make a lot more sense. This new photo video toggle or movie still toggle is actually a first for Sony. Yes, you can switch between photo and video modes on many of their alpha cameras, but those are all photo first bodies with video features added on. This is the first time we're seeing a video first, cinema first camera body that can also shoot high quality stills. Personally, I've used the Sony A7 IV as my go-to hybrid camera, but to be honest, it ends up staying in my kit mostly as a photo-only camera body, partly because of the ergonomics and partly because I primarily shoot video and lean on the FX3 most of the time. The downside is I often have to carry and switch between both the A7 IV right now and the FX3, and that can slow down my workflow, especially when I'm doing both photo and video. Now, this dedicated toggle switch though helps solve that in a big way. It makes it way easier to grab stills while I'm already set up for video, and that's a huge win for me, especially shooters like me that primarily shoot video but do also a lot of photo work as well. One really cool feature is the ability to use S-Log even in photo mode. That means you can now color match your stills and video clips more seamlessly. Now, this is something that's super helpful when delivering projects that include both photo and video assets. Now, the big question is, how good is the photo and video quality if it's doing both? The FX2 features a brand new 33 megapixel sensor, which allows it to output a 7K downsample to 4K when recording. That's a pretty big deal for sharpness and overall clarity, and there's some benefits to that new sensor. In terms of flexibility, the camera can shoot in both full frame and Super 35 modes. That Super 35 crop is actually super useful because it gives video shooters access to a wider range of lenses and the ability to create different looks depending on the project. With the Super 35 mode, you can now use APS-C crop lenses, which Sony has a ton of. They're also way cheaper than their full frame lenses. And on top of that, on the cinema side, many of these cinema lenses are Super 35 or cropped, so now you can use those on this camera as well, alongside some of the full frame features. But there are some limitations worth noting. In full frame, the max frame rate caps at 4K 30. If you want to shoot 4K 60, you'll need to switch to the Super 35 modes, at least at the time of this video. I've got a few thoughts on the resolution and frame rates, but I'll save that for later in the video. Now, when it comes to photos, the 33 megapixel sensor actually delivers some really solid results, easily comparable to Sony's photo-first cameras like the A7 IV and others. And because of those improved photo capabilities, Sony is also claiming that this camera has 30% better autofocus performance compared to, let's say, the FX3 and FX30, which definitely makes it feel more responsive, especially when using autofocus or tracking subjects. Now, it won't keep up with something like an A7R or one of Sony's higher-end photo cameras in terms of image resolution, but it's a step up from the photo quality that obviously comes out of something like an A7S III, FX3, or FX30. This camera also features a dual base ISO of 800 and 4000, with a high ISO mode that goes all the way up to 102,400. I'll still need to do more testing to really see how it performs in low light compared to other cameras, especially with the new sensor, but so far, I'm happy with the results, and it looks like it holds up well enough for most real-world shooting situations. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Sony invited me out to the ASC masterclass for content creators. ASC stands for American Society of Cinematographers. It's essentially a pretty recognizable title that you'll see it behind after the name of many director of photographies or DPs, because when they shoot movies, it's kind of a credibility statement. You have to be invited to be in the ASC, essentially. But it was very, very cool to have a masterclass put on by some industry pros such as Claudio Miranda, Oren Sofer, Sam McCurdy, and Charlie Lieberman. Now, these people have shot things that no doubt many of us have seen, things like Shogun, Top Gun Maverick, the new F1 movie, and it was very, very humbling to be in a room full of people who are way, way more talented than I am. And so it was a very great learning experience. The whole masterclass was kind of around lighting and cinematography, and being able to ask questions to these DPs and how they approach a frame. But I would say that it was very cool to learn and refreshing to hear that many of them have the same approach, in the sense that it's really not about the gear. Now, I know this is kind of contradicting considering this whole video is about a camera and we're diving deep into the FX2, but this event was happening around the release of the FX2, and we did get to see the FX2 fully rigged out and in action, which was insanely cool. However, it was funny to see that we didn't really talk about the gear much, and I think that's by design, right? Like, we don't want to get caught up in the gear too much. We did talk about focal lengths and lenses and things like that. We didn't get too into the weeds of sensors and 24 frames versus 120 frames, all those kind of things in camera capabilities, right? We just kind of went over why what's in front of the lens is the most important thing to consider. The body design of the FX2 is very similar to the FX3 and FX30, but there are definitely a few noticeable differences. Aside from the obvious additions like the built-in tiltable EVF and the new movie and stills toggle switch on the back, the hand grip is actually a little bit larger, which is actually more comfortable to hold compared to the FX30 and FX3. Especially if you're shooting handheld or taking photos for longer periods, this extra size on the grip does make a subtle but impactful difference. The power button has also been moved to more of the center rather than on the left, obviously because the EVF now is taking up that spot. One thing that stood out to me is the new fan and vent design, which you can see when you flip out the screen. There's actually some vents now on the back. I'm assuming this is to handle the extra processing power, but it should also help with thermal performance during longer shoots. My only concern with this new design though is, does it introduce more fan noise? Because I do actually use the scratch audio or built-in mic from the my FX3 a lot. So if there's more noise generating now, I just don't know if it'll impact the audio as much. The side ports have also been redesigned to its other counterparts. Unlike the FX3 and 30, the headphone jack and mic jack are now exposed, but at the bottom. They're not tucked behind a door anymore. And at first, I thought Sony did that to, I don't know, cut costs, but it actually solves a very practical problem that I forgot that I ran into all the time on the other camera bodies. If you plug in headphones or a mic on the other cameras, you can't fully tilt the screen like this because the headphone jack or any cables, it will literally be hitting the screen when you're trying to tilt it. So with the new lower placement of these ports, the headphone and mic jack, you can freely move the screen without having to bump your cables. When it comes to high quality audio inputs, similar to the FX30, the FX2 doesn't come with the XLR audio handle, but it is compatible and you can purchase it separately and attach it to the top using the same 2 mounting points just like before. Other than those changes, the camera body feels very familiar in hand and something that we're probably all used to. And it also still obviously has the red tally lights that indicates when you're recording, which is honestly one of my favorite features. It's a small thing, but it's something you rarely see on photo-first camera bodies. I also had a chance to connect with many of the creators that you and I probably watch, and it was cool just to see how other content creators are blending the worlds of cinematography and filmmaking into their content creation workflows, especially for things like YouTube or social first things. Obviously, everyone has a very unique style, everyone has a different set of skills, but just again, being in a room full of people who are doing the same thing as you or similar things was very inspiring. Big shout out to Sony Cine for, of course, sending us the FX2 so we can talk about it together on this video, and also for sending me out to the ASC masterclass and try to learn more skills on how I can level up my cinematography and my filmmaking skills, and just in general, my video approach so we can make better videos. And of course, outside of this channel, I'm doing a lot of other client work and video production, so that was an insanely cool experience. I feel like when the FX2 was first released, naturally a lot of people were comparing it right away to the Sony a7 IV because on paper, they're pretty much identical cameras, or at least the specs are. But I think, that's not really Sony's intent. It wasn't to make a camera that was identical, just wrapped in a different body. But at the end of the day, I do think the form factor and the body is pretty much one of the main differences that if you're switching over, you're doing it for the form factor and functionality of it, not just for the specs. If you're just strictly going specs for spec, you probably, if you have the a7 IV already or you prefer that style, you would just go get that camera. The only reason why you get an FX2 over an a7 IV is, of course, the more video focused camera body. But also what I found super interesting was actually the color science between the FX2 or versus the FX2 and a7 IV. I feel like when I was kind of watching other creators talk about this, Potato Jet Gene had a really good segment that I feel like adds some credibility as well. He was at an event and he was able to talk to Nobu Takahashi, which is one of the key people behind the Sony Cinema line, and he was able to explain why the FX2 matches closer to other cameras like the FX3 or FX6 versus the a7 IV.
Okay, so right now I'm shooting on the a7 IV, and I noticed whenever I take the a7 IV and the FX3, they don't really match, but the FX2 and the FX3 match a lot better. Why is that?
Since the cinema line, we prioritize look and operability. So the look is very important one within the cinema line. From the Venice to the FX30, we try to match the color as much as possible. It's not perfectly matched, but it's very easy to match.
And even my own testing up until this point, I have found that the a7 IV doesn't necessarily match perfectly with the FX3 or FX6. It's not a huge difference. Honestly, with a little bit of color grading and tweaking, you can pretty much match it identical. But again, it's just something to consider. Now, of course, for that small color science difference, it wouldn't make me want to, jump ship and quickly go spend money on a piece of camera gear. But at the same time, if I was in a position to not have the a7 IV and I was shopping around for a video first camera body, I would definitely be looking at the FX2, especially if I need something that can shoot photos like an a7 IV, but needs to be able to shoot more video. But if you want to watch an awesome FX2 video and breakdown, I would definitely recommend go checking out Gene Potato Jet's channel and watching his video on this camera. Now this next feature is more of a firmware feature, but it's a big one. Sony has added the Big 6 menu layout to the FX2, the same intuitive layout found on their high-end Burano or Venice cinema cameras. Now, this menu design is really popular among professional filmmakers and video shooters because it makes it quick and easy to access and change your most crucial video settings without digging through a cluttered menu or small function buttons. When you toggle between photo and video mode now, the entire menu layout adapts to that mode. It's really a nice touch, especially coming from something like the A7 IV, where switching between photo and video modes still keeps you in a more traditional photo style menu like this. When you go back to video with this camera, it automatically changes back to the big 6. So now that we've covered all the things I really like about this camera, let me share a few things that I think could definitely be improved. First, and probably the most important, is the limited frame rates. In full frame mode for video, you're capped at 4K 30, which honestly feels wild considering current camera offerings out there, even from other brands, are going crazy with frame rates these days. 4K 120 is almost like a minimum. But for a lot of shooters, especially those who film in full frame for the look and depth of field, this could be a deal breaker. If you want to shoot in 4K 60, you'll have to switch over to Super 35 mode, which isn't ideal for everyone. This could change in the future, maybe through a firmware update, but as of right now, yeah, the frame rates are pretty limited. Second is that this EVF is non-removable. Like, you can't take it off, it kind of lives on the camera. And I get that it was probably a design challenge to make it removable, but the shape of it makes it a little awkward to pack into a camera bag, especially if you're trying to travel light, or if you're like me and your Pelican or your camera bag is typically packed really tight. You know, the design of it, because this eye cup kind of sticks out now, it's hard to put it like this. But if you put it fully vertical, I guess in theory you can swap it down, but then you have the height issue. It's not the end of the world, but definitely if it was removable, then you kind of can pack it in the same slots you probably pack your FX3 or FX30. You just have to kind of get creative a little bit with how you're gonna pack this away in more compact setups. A very small detail, but the placement of the EVF can also feel a bit cramped when you're using the XLR audio handle. Now, realistically, you probably won't be using the EVF and the recording XLR handle at the same time, but it's still something to think about depending on how you rig your setup. So who is this camera for? I'll be honest, when I first heard about this camera release, I was a little disappointed. Other brands have really been cooking lately with some competitive camera releases, and like a lot of people, I was really hoping for a proper Sony FX3 Mark II, but maybe they're still working on it. And honestly, that was pretty wishful thinking considering there are other cameras in the lineup that have been out longer than even the FX3 that probably need to be updated as well. But for now, this camera won't replace your FX3, and I can say that confidently. And maybe not even your FX30, but it could be an amazing companion or B cam to either of those cameras or any of the cameras in the FX lineup, even on the higher end. Especially if you're looking for a video first B cam that also gives you the flexibility to shoot high quality stills, which is not something the other cameras in the Sony lineup offer. And for those of you shooting on higher end bodies like FX6, FX9, Burano, or Venice, this finally gives you a compact B cam that stays within the Sony cinema line and can handle stills when needed. Sony has relayed to me that based off the customer feedback that they've gotten, they are saying that many professional filmmakers and DPs and cinematographers will use this camera as a location scouting camera. Thanks to the built-in EVF for viewing, the high contrast, it makes it a lot easier, especially when you're outside. The small form factor is much better than trying to take out, you know, like an FX9 or a Burano or something big to location scout. And the Super 35 mode allows them to put on other lenses or other cinema lenses onto this camera body. So it's right there in the name, FX2. This is Sony's new entry point into their cinema ecosystem. And honestly, it fills a gap that hasn't really existed for them and for many Sony shooters until now. If you have any questions about the FX2 or how it fits into your workflow and you're curious, drop them down below. I'll try to do my best to answer all the questions. And if you're still thinking about picking up an FX3, I've made a full review after using that camera for over 4 years now. And I made that video a while back. You can watch, I'll link it over here or somewhere down below. And you can check that out on the channel. This is not a final production unit, so many of the things are subject to change when this video comes out. But for the most part, I think Sony did a decent job on the FX2, and now there's an even better entry point for content creators, filmmakers, who are looking to make the jump from something maybe like a photo Alpha series camera body into the FX Cine lineup that Sony offers. I know for me personally, I'm gonna be having a lot of fun with going back from video to photo mode with something like this. But again, I'll try to do a long-term review after testing it. There's just so much to still learn about this camera. It's so new. But thanks for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed it. See you guys next one. Peace.